Imagine lying in a foxhole somewhere in the Ardennes forest, winter 1944, your breath crystallizing in the frozen air as artillery shells scream overhead. Your uniform is soaked through, your hands are numb, and the nearest field hospital is miles behind enemy lines. In that moment, between the chaos of combat and the long stretches of waiting, survival didn't depend on your rifle or your courage alone. It depended on something far more fundamental, something that military strategists would later call the greatest medical breakthrough of the war. This wasn't a weapon or a tactic, it was whole blood delivered fresh to the front lines, and the system that made it possible revolutionized battlefield survival in ways that would echo through every conflict that followed. When American forces landed on the beaches of Normandy, they carried with them more than ammunition and rations. Hidden in refrigerated containers, preserved in the holds of hospital ships, traveled millions of units of whole blood donated by civilians back home. This was unprecedented. During the First World War, a soldier who went into shock from blood loss had a survival rate of barely 4%. By 1945, that number had climbed to 50%, and whole blood transfusions were the cornerstone of that transformation. The system itself was a marvel of logistics and human compassion. Blood collected in churches and community centers across America, tested and preserved, then rushed across the Atlantic on specially equipped vessels. Medics at aid stations just behind the front lines could now perform transfusions in muddy tents under fire, replacing lost blood volume before shock set in. The soldier bleeding out in that Ardennes foxhole now had a fighting chance, not because of tactical genius, but because someone thousands of miles away had rolled up their sleeve and given a part of themselves. What made this system so revolutionary was the transition from plasma to whole blood. Plasma had been used earlier in the war, and it worked reasonably well for treating shock, but it lacked the oxygen-carrying capacity of red blood cells. Soldiers with massive hemorrhaging needed more than fluid replacement. They needed hemoglobin. By late 1944, the military had solved the puzzle of preserving and transporting whole blood using refrigeration and anticoagulants, creating a supply chain that stretched from donor to soldier in a matter of days. Field hospitals near the front became hubs of frantic life-saving activity. Surgeons worked by lantern light, their hands steady despite the thunder of nearby bombardments, transfusing blood into pale, trembling men who, just moments before, had been slipping away. The innovation extended beyond the blood itself. Medical corpsmen were trained to identify shock symptoms immediately, to establish intravenous lines under combat conditions, and to prioritize casualties based on survivability, a brutal calculus that nonetheless saved countless lives. The irony is profound. This system, which represented one of humanity's finest collaborative achievements during its darkest hour, faded from popular memory almost as soon as the war ended. Perhaps it was just too ordinary, maybe even a bit too clinical, compared to all those dramatic stories of tank battles and aerial dogfights. Perhaps it was because the innovation became so thoroughly woven into civilian medicine that its wartime origins just seemed, well, kind of irrelevant. Or perhaps in our eagerness to move past the trauma of global conflict, we simply stopped telling these quieter stories of ingenuity and compassion. Yet the lessons remain vital. The blood donation system taught us that survival in crisis demands both individual sacrifice and collective organization. It showed us that logistics can be as heroic as combat, and that the willingness to give of ourselves, literally, creates resilience that no amount of weaponry can match. For those of us who study fieldcraft and preparedness, this forgotten chapter offers something profound. Modern bushcraft often focuses on individual skills, fire-making, shelter building, foraging. But World War II's medical revolution reminds us that true survival is communal. It requires systems, training, and the courage to depend on others. So today's prepper can learn to suture a wound or, fashion a tourniquet, but the deeper lesson is this. Resilience isn't just about what you know or what you carry. It's really about the networks you build, the skills you share, and your willingness to be part of something larger than yourself. When the next crisis comes, and it definitely will, we'll need both the individual competence of the frontline medic and the organized compassion of an entire society rolling up its sleeves. If this story resonates with you, if it reminds you that history's greatest lessons often hide in plain sight, then, subscribe to Fieldcraft Chronicles. Share this video with anyone who understands that survival is both an art and a responsibility. Together, we'll keep these stories alive, and in doing so, keep ourselves prepared for whatever comes next.